So next up is the suspension of the bulldozer. Now, we're gonna try and put this together with the rest of the body, since that's pretty much all I think I can fit into a square. So we're gonna start off with this main part here, the blue one, and as you can see, it's a huge mess in terms of UV. So we're just gonna have to go over and redo a lot of it. Again, I'm using angle-based selection, where it tries to select everything that sits in an angle with a certain threshold, and just doing planar projections with that selection. So then next up is this little piece here. I'm going to try and select this thing as well. Easiest would be to just select that polygon and then grow that thing out until we have something to work with. Now this is a fairly annoying mesh to unwrap. You won't really see it that much. I have to create it, but you won't really see it that much, except for the polygon at the end. So I'm just going to do a cylindrical there. There's going to be some distortion, but that's not really a problem. So there we go. Got that done. I'm just going to do a cylindrical here again and try and move the seam to the bottom where you can't really see it. That's something you have to keep in mind when you do cylindrical unwraps, to move the seam by rotating the gizmo to a place where you can't really see it. It's easy to forget, and you know, unfortunately, most of the time it tends to place the seam somewhere very obvious, not the place you want it to be. So again, we're going to do a cylindrical for this piece. And the seam should be in a decent place because I don't think it's at the top. So just trying to fit some of these main parts together. Next up, this area here, I think we're just going to do a planar projection from the front with this. And might want to do relax on it because there is some stretching. So I did talk about relax not being a very good thing to use. The only time I do use relax is pretty much on these sort of cylindrical things, where it doesn't make sense to split them up in so many parts, but it does make sense to try and reduce the distortion on them a bit. So here we go, interesting. This part, might want to, right, so we need these polygons, we need that one as well. And it's being a bit annoying, doing a planar projection on that. I'm going to select these and simply do a cylindrical on them from that angle. There we go, that looks about right. And the funny thing is with the cylindrical gizmo, it doesn't really matter how you scale it. The unwrapping tends to be the same. So you can see the unwrapping isn't changing, so that's kind of interesting. But then we have this part at the top here. I'm going to do a cylindrical on there as well. Moving it tends to move the seam as well. So obviously we don't want the seam to be in a position where it splits the thing up. So with that done, I want to select these parts at the top as well. So those areas. And I'm going to unwrap that as one single piece. And obviously it's created a lot of seams, so I'm just going to hit Control W to weld those up. Let's see, there's a problem here. It doesn't really want to weld together. Same here. I might have to use the alignment there. There we go. So sometimes it just tends to split things up when you don't really want that happening. Then we're going to weld that into place. Stitch that into place, sorry. And select this element, move it out so it's not intersecting or anything. Now again, when tweaking the other unwrap there, I messed up this part, so I'm just going to fix it up again. There we go. Using relax sometimes tends to scale a UV island down, tends to make it a little bit smaller, which is fairly annoying, so you have to go back in and scale it up to try and get the scale right. So yeah, that might conflict with the rule of not scaling things, but if it's really only a tiny bit, only like 10%, so you won't really notice that much. So got some more parts here that we're doing planar projections on. These things here at the bottom as well. We're quickly going to unfold those. It looks like it's making a bit of a mess out of them by splitting things up. So again, we're going to weld those. There we are. And this thing here, so it's completely split up. We're going to have to unfold again. It seems to be like it's a pretty annoying bug where if you unfold separate selections, so separate UV islands, it just doesn't want to do it. It only does it for the first one in your selection. So then we have this part here. I'm scaling these down because, you know, you will never see these parts, but they still have to be there. So I can get away with making them slightly smaller. And then we're going to collapse that piece and go for a little bit of fixing here. Just going to weld up some parts which I think are some slight offenders for not being completely welded, and put the unwrap back on there and continue with the work. So do some stitching, make sure there's no intersections. Got this little detail at the top. Just going to do an unfold on that. Obviously need to weld that again. Very annoying having to do this, but there's just no other way around it. And then deselect those parts and stitch all of them into place. Now this back part here also needs some unwrapping done. I think we can just use an unfold for that. Let's see, yeah, it looks like we need to do some more welding there. Rotate this around. And trying to place it in a logical position there at the bottom. These inside areas. Let's see. I think we can do an unfold here again. And rotate this around a little bit. That's a part that might be eligible for scaling down because you won't really see it so much. Another unfold on this final area. Alright, here, this is the back. And I've collapsed the UVs after symmetrically unwrapping them. I'm going to be cleaning this up a bit, making it a lot simpler. Why? Well, simply because you won't see this, and it makes sense to try and share as much of the UV space as possible, but simplify this thing up. That does mean that some of the UVs here at the back are going to be messed up, something's going to be wrong with them, but let's be honest, you will never see, so just trying to simplify that slightly. So again, some more target welding to make these things simple. A lot of stuff here that just isn't really needed. Then we attach that little part there. And we've got this one. And let's see. For this piece, I'm just going to select that bottom area because that's the one I changed the most. And just try and deselect the parts that are curved. Then we're just going to do a planar projection again. Simply reproject it in a planar way. And it's being a bit annoying in terms of selection, so obviously you have to turn off your planar before you can start moving it again. And then we're going to stitch these things back into place after fixing up the bottom UVs. Okay, so we've got that thing done. These two, because they might be visible, so I prefer to unwrap them in a way where you can't really see the mirroring of the UVs. Or it's also separate, so I'm going to move that out. Same for this thing, move it over there. And there we go, using the grow selection to move this one out. Alright. And finally that piece, just going to move it up there as well. Then we've got this little attachment bracket at the top. That one's unwrapped as well, just simple unfold and stitching. Then we're going to jump to this next part, which holds the front rollers. Do a simple flatten UV maps here so we can work with that. Has a few funky shapes which are a bit harder to work with. I'm taking that one out of that area because you're going to get problems with the normal map there. You don't want sharp edges. They're obviously going to have different normals to sit right next to each other in the UVs. So that's why I'm splitting them apart. Stitching this thing, moving it out. Got this little part here. Let's see where we're going to place that. It's the one at the front-facing one, so that looks about okay. Got this back piece here. Trying to put that in a logical position where it actually sits in the real thing. This thing at the front here. And that's a part of the back, so I might try and move those like that. And this area we just want to stitch that. It makes sense to keep those as a continuous piece. And this thing, which is the bottom, that's the inside, not all that important. So for now, we can work with that. And this area then, because I don't want the mirroring to be too obvious here again, I'm gonna move these out, weld them together again. Again, for these pieces, I'm putting a slightly more effort into not having too much shared UV space because they're very obvious. Like the suspension is one of the most viewed things in the bulldozer, so trying to put some love into the UV space there. I'm gonna stitch that part together. It's giving me some trouble stitching. There we go, and then use the line button to rotate this perfectly straight. Go both of those aligned. And then obviously move these out so they don't sit on top of each other anymore. And then we're going to go to the next part, which is this sort of the bracket that holds the big axle for the rollers at the front. Bit of an annoying piece with this complex shape because of the slightly chamfered edges at the front part. We have to make sure we do the UVs decently for that. And just going to detach these. Yeah, so we want to stitch every single one of these separate parts. We could try to stitch them in, but I think we're just going to do it with a straight piece like this. Attach it, the top one to it. Then detach all those and go back and do it like that. There we are. Now these are overlapping, so I have to get rid of that, take them apart. Do some slide stitching here, fix these little triangles. You might think I'm distorting those triangles, but you won't notice, so we can just get away with that. Alright, there you go. Move those around. And then do this roller here. We made this one symmetrical, so we're only going to unwrap one half. The two halves can then use the exact same UVs. So front projection for this front part, and then the part that sticks out there in the middle a bit, we're going to detach that and do a cylindrical on it. Place it next to it. And then this part, again, we're just going to do a cylindrical there. So there we are. Now this bottom part, that's the tiny axle part, so we have to redo the cylindrical. And things might be slightly offset from the screen here. It's because sometimes I tend to lose track of where the UV window is, but you can see what's going on still. So scaling this up slightly because of the relax. And then next up, this big, the big sprocket that drives it, the drive sprocket. So doing a cylindrical on that piece, first the obvious parts. Rotating it so we can move the seam to the bottom. And then use angular selection to do a front projection of that piece of the sprocket. So there we go. We're going to do one for the back as well. And we're going to make this one smaller. It won't have the same UVs, but it's not very important compared to the other ones. So we just scale it down and put in that hole in the center. Now we've still got these parts left. For all those, the parts of the sprocket, we're going to have to do a complete unfold for that. The back part is just a simple cylindrical, which you can move down here. And then this, an unfold, obviously turn off normalize. There we are. There's one part there that I apparently missed. It's probably because of some sort of ignored back facing or whatever. So select a little bit too much, but it looks like we've got the correct space now. we go. We just do those in one piece. Move the seam down again. Definitely can't forget for this piece to move the seam down. Then again, if this is animated, the seam's going to rotate, but yeah, you know, for default positions, might as well try to put it in a position where you won't really notice. So that's that for the sprocket. We have this slightly different version of the attachment for the small rollers. The attachment point, yeah, it's pretty much unwrapped in the same way. Just a few flattens to start out with, then do some welding on some of these pieces. It's a bit of a crazy shape, but, you know, trying to get them, get it unwrapped in a bit of a logical way. So something very strange was up with these parts here. So for some reason, flatten is completely distorting these things. There we are, got all of these. And then we're gonna unfold those parts and detach these and then stitch them in. These 6-sided nuts are, you know, kind of annoying to unwrap because you have to do the same thing for every single one. So I've just slightly skipped ahead and back to the old aligning trick for every single point. So I've skipped ahead. I've done it for every single point here just to make sure that they match up nicely. Then grab them and move them out. This was a slightly smaller piece than the one I've done that for before, so I could have gotten away with not doing it, but I just want to keep things tidy and I'll do it anyway. So then we've got this thing here. I'm re-instancing these out to share some UV space, right? So deleting that, I'm going to grab this one, which I've unwrapped before. Then all of these parts, I'm going to add a unwrap modifier to all of them at the same time. And then I'm just going to have a look at all the pieces, and there we go. Looks like we have everything unwrapped. So for those bottom parts there, we skipped ahead, we didn't show it. Don't worry, it was quite simple in UVs. You should be able to figure it out by now. So some puzzling to try and put these parts together. You can see the UVs for those bottom parts here, so if you really want to have a look, just pause the video and rewind a little bit. Bring these around. So I'm going to treat these rollers as a separate piece, trying to puzzle them together efficiently first before I'm going to combine them with the rest of the body. So that should be about it for most pieces. Then I'm going to unhide the rest of the low poly that I've unwrapped before. And then select these parts. Select all of them. And try to move these around to fit them together with the rest. Move that one up there. And let's see. We can do some puzzling here. This piece, that piece. These are the same. I don't want them to look all too similar, so they all look the same, so I'm going to move them out so we can create slightly different versions of them. Otherwise, the repetition is going to be very obvious. With four the same pieces, you might want to avoid that a little bit. So move that in a little bit because it's slightly less long. I'm trying to manually fit the shape here because they're kind of different. Just manually moving that, I should reduce the distortion. So, I'm gonna grab these things, move them out a bit, because the puzzling here wasn't really that good. Gonna try and reduce some of it, and then once these parts are in a good shape, we can start puzzling them together with the rest. So it makes sense to try and fill up the holes with existing things we have here. With these, we mirror them a little bit, we can fit them in there. So don't be afraid to mirror certain parts if if they shouldn't be mirrored. If there's no text on there or anything, and you can puzzle them together better if you mirror them, then just go ahead and do that. Like, especially for smaller parts, it really doesn't matter that much. I'm gonna move things slightly tighter, so we save some space like that. These pieces seem to fit together nicely over there. This one might make more sense to move it over there. Okay, so now that we have these things, looks like we can puzzle that one in there. And again, just rotating, seeing what fits best. I want to put that one over there. Trying to repeat some of the parts for the back area. Scaling those down a little bit just to save some space. Like I said, these are the ones that are at the back, so I can get away with doing some things in a way that saves me more UV space. So these parts, I'm breaking it apart, creating a bunch more seams, but that's not really a problem because they sit at the back and you don't see them so much. Taking this top part, moving it in there. And I think we've almost got it for these pieces. I'm going to rotate these a bit to fit them in better as well. And then move those up there. Okay, so the last bit of puzzling left. Again, I'm cutting some parts away from each other just to make it easier to place them somewhere. Because the bigger and the more awkward a shape is of a part, the harder it gets to puzzle it in somewhere. So if it's not that much of an important part, you can just cut them apart and move them around like you want. So again, trying to save some space there. And I'm moving this part in here, but then I'll have to move those away. This one's a bit more difficult to fit because it doesn't consist of so many small parts. Then we have this part here, which I'll be placing over there. As you can see, it's starting to get a little bit trickier to puzzle these things. I'm going to grab this one. Same with that one. And I'm just trying to see how we best puzzle this. Because this part's an awkward one. I mean, I have to fit it into the limited space I still have. And let's see. We're going to do it that one. I think we're going to cut this part off and stitch it onto that one, because that's the area where we don't want to see the repetition. It makes more sense to place these two together in there. And again, we've got some overlapping there. It's really going to be hard to fit this in. So this piece sits at the back, so I'm just going to scale it down a bit, and you will barely see it. Grab this one, make it a bit smaller as well since it's the bottom. We fit this one in here. And we're starting to get there with our pieces. Starting to come together. I think I'll take this one apart again, because it's really a difficult shape, like a U-shaped thing. It's very hard to get rid of it. So move that one over there. So the further you get, the harder it gets to puzzle with certain pieces, and you're going to have to pull apart the layouts that you've made before. Which is not really a problem, it's a bit more work to try and get things to fit. I'm going to put that one instead of the other one in that position. So, and this piece at the inside, so I'll just scale it down a bit. And then we still have the big sprocket left here with that very, very long stretch of the sprocket teeth that have been unwrapped. So I'll see what I do with that. I'm probably going to place it at one of the extremes of the square shape that I'm trying to match this to. Take these and put them over there. It really is becoming hard to fit things because I'm starting to meet the limits of my square. Something like that. Okay, and we're almost there for unwrapping the suspension. Should be about good to go. Just change the color to signify that we've done these. And that's it.